The Wii U is often considered to be Nintendo's worst home console in history, and from a sales standpoint, there's certainly no denying that. However, if sales were to be the only thing that determines greatness, then New Super Mario Bros. On the Wii is better than Mario Galaxies 1 and 2 combined, and if you ask me, I think anybody in their right mind would agree that that statement's horse apples. So with that being said, I really don't think it's fair to brush the Wii U off as Nintendo's worst home console of all time, because if you were to be exiled to the moon for pantsing the Prime Minister and were allowed to take the Wii U and its entire game library with you, then I'd wager that you'd have a pretty damn good time. However, that begs the question, if the Wii U isn't Nintendo's worst home console of all time, then what is? Well, I mean, obviously, that's completely subjective, but if we're comparing the Wii U to Nintendo's other home consoles that were considered disappointments, then that would only leave the GameCube and the 64 in the conversation, but seeing as how everyone except for this jabroni right here seems to agree that the GameCube's awesome, then it looks like the 64 is the only other contender. But before you tear my ass up in the comments, make sure to sit back in your dad's favorite chair, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's least attractive scientist, CameronAllOneWord, to pit the Nintendo 64 and the Wii U up against each other in a not so fatal but still important battle. Okay, so even though I'm pretty much screwed no matter what I say right now, I still feel like I need to clarify that I'm not saying that any of Nintendo's home consoles are bad, and I'm well aware that the Nintendo 64 is actually a lot of people's favorites. The whole point of this video is really just to give the Wii U a fair trial more than anything else, rather than just brand it as Nintendo's worst home console of all time just because it has the reputation of being a commercial failure. And look, obviously the Virtual Boy is Nintendo's worst gaming platform, but that was technically considered a portable, which I thought was common sense, but hey, I addressed the Virtual Boy, so let's move on. Some might say that the Wii U being the only home console to ever lose money for Nintendo should be enough to consider it the worst, but I firmly believe that the failure had very little to do with the quality of the console or games, but rather because of the poor marketing as most people believe, and especially because of the much less talked about fact that the 3DS was cheaper, portable, and had more games along with third-party support. And while the graphics might not have been as impressive on the 3DS as they were on the Wii U, they were still good enough to justify not spending an extra $300. I mean, is Mario Kart 8 or Smash Wii U really that much better than Mario Kart 7 or Smash 3DS? Would anyone have actually complained if A Link Between Worlds or Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon were on the Wii U instead? Well, seeing as no one seemed to mind the Link's Awakening remake costing $60 on the Switch, I've gotta say that I really don't think so of course no one wanted to buy a Wii U. And since handheld consoles reached the point where they were more or less just as capable of home consoles, then it really didn't make sense for Nintendo to divide their game libraries up and instead just focus on one platform that does both. However, even though the Wii U wasn't better than the 3DS to the point where it could justify spending an extra $300, it doesn't mean that it was bad by any means. In fact, I think it actually had some pretty badass games, and if you're gonna make comparisons between two game consoles, then the game libraries are clearly the first place you gotta look. And look, I totally understand that the games on the 64 did a lot more to push the gaming industry as a whole forward, whereas the Wii U's touch controls and the gamepad weren't really all that groundbreaking. So in that respect, the 64 is clearly the better of the two consoles, but if you eliminate nostalgia and historical significance though, then I think the Wii U's honestly just plain better. Sure, there's games like Banjo-Kazooie that'll always hold up in my opinion, and Mario 64's definitely got a lot more imagination than Mario 3D World, but for the most part, I feel like most of the games in the 64's library don't really hold up all that well, whereas developers on the Wii U had over a decade's worth of experience with 3D games to the point where even some of the games that were considered bad are still better than some of the legendary 64 titles. And not only do the Wii U's 3D games have more polish, but it also had some of the best 2D games of all time, like Shovel Knight, Tropical Freeze, Yoshi's Woolly World, and Super Mario Maker, which is essentially a never-ending 2D Mario game. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think titles like Yoshi's Story could even compare to those games. I don't think it's fair to include backwards compatibility, the Virtual Console, or HD remasters of games from previous generations like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess HD, otherwise this would have been a pretty open and shut case, but I still think ports from games within the same generation ought to count, and to me, games like Arkham City beef the Wii U up a lot more than Resident Evil 2 beefs the 64 up. It's kind of a coin toss on whether you prefer Breath of the Wild or Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask combined, but even though Star Fox, Mario Party, and Paper Mario are definitely better on the 64, I still don't think that's gonna be enough to turn the tide in the 64's favor when Mario Kart 8's like a billion times better than Mario Kart 64. And I'm sure this is probably gonna ruffle a few feathers, but unless you're a hardcore competitive player, I'd say the exact same thing about Smash Bros. Wii U. And when you're comparing all the wildcard games like Pikmin 3, Bayonetta 2, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Splatoon, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and even Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker to titles like Conker's Bad Fur Day, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, No Mercy, and Pokemon Snap, I just don't think the 64 has a chance. Again, that's if you're taking nostalgia out of the equation, of course. Seeing as how pretty much every notable game on the Wii U got enhanced ports on the Switch, it kinda waters the console's legacy down even more, which is why suggesting that it might be better than the 64 sounds so crazy, but some of these games are actually an ass hair better on the Wii U than they were on the Switch, cause even though the gamepad was mostly pointless, there were a few occasions where it actually made games better, like multitasking being way easier in Pikmin 3, and if I'm being honest, I just don't think Pikmin 3'd be as efficient on the Switch, and I dare say the same thing about Pikmin 4. And besides, even though the gamepad was mostly pointless, one thing that I can't say about it is that it was uncomfortable, especially compared to the 64's controller. And if you've been watching my videos for a little while, then you probably already know that I don't exactly have the nicest things to say about this thing. I mean, sure, it's not heavy as hell like the Wii U gamepad, but unless you've got 3 hands, then there's always gonna be dead weight hanging off your side if you're not using the D-pad for the 2D games that barely even exist on the console in the first place. And even if your muscles aren't tough enough to bear the strain of the gamepad, most Wii U games are compatible with the underrated Pro Controller, and both offer rumble in games without jamming a pack into the back of your controller that requires batteries. However, since I'm a fair man, I will say that while the 64's controller is not the most comfortable in my opinion, I do love the fact that there's assloads of different designs and colorways for it, along with the actual console itself, which is definitely an area where the Wii U's totally lacking aside from the Wind Waker console, which is kinda cool I guess, but still nowhere near as flashy or as cool as the Pikachu 64. Or really even any of the other colorways for that matter while we're at it. But even so, this still isn't enough to be a difference maker for me, and while I prefer cartridges over discs, the 64 decided to get rid of end labels for some reason, which makes organizing games feel confusing or bootleg, since the only alternative is to use your own unofficial labels, and I don't know about you, but I've always hated finding retro games with writing all over them, but with the 64 you can't really blame people for doing it. At the end of the day, the 64 is far more important, influential, and successful than the Wii U, and I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with taking nostalgia into consideration, so if you look at it that way, the 64 is clearly the superior console. However, if you're somehow watching this video from the distant post-apocalyptic year of 2021 with no knowledge of video games and need to choose between playing the 64 and the Wii U, then I think you'll have a lot more fun with the latter, all things considered. And honestly, I think it's kinda sad how most people overlook how great the Wii U really was just because of how miserably it failed. But anyway, which console do you prefer, the Nintendo 69 or the Wii U? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But let me tell you, if there's 2 badasses who are even better than the 64 and the Wii U combined, then it would definitely be today's patrons of the day, Cactus Corpse and Timothy Dyer. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes and silly rewards in the mail. Send pictures or videos of you rocking merch if you want to make cameos in my videos, and follow me on Twitch if you ever want to hang out whenever I play video games sometimes. My name's CameronAllOneWord, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.